As American Thanksgiving is in our rear view mirrors, it's time to check out where teams stand in the NHL standings. We've got that, our women's hockey spotlight, and a very full schedule of games ahead this weekend, all coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. I'm here every Friday with Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers. And Rachel, happy Friday. How was your Thanksgiving?
That was pretty good. Pretty solid.
All right.
How about you?
Very good. Very good. Time to enjoy the rest of this holiday weekend here in the States. And fortunately, that means a lot of hockey. But, before we get into the weekend schedule, the NHL, the cliche is that if you're not in a playoff spot by American Thanksgiving, you're in big trouble. What is it, about 85% of the teams that are in a playoff spot by Thanksgiving usually make the playoffs at the end of the season? So when we look at the standings now, the one thing that strikes me more than anything else is just how close they are across the board.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Even looking at, the Eastern Conference, let's say, the Leafs are atop with 28 points, right? In the Atlantic, Carolina's got 33, but the Rangers at 25, only 3 points out of the top Atlantic team, looking at, the first wild card Metro team. It's super close.
Yeah, and then when you figure that the Tampa Bay Lightning, as of right now, are the second wild card, and only 5 points separate that second wild card team in the standings from the last place team right now in the standings, which is the Montreal Canadiens with 19 points, you've got 10 teams within 5 points of each other or 6 points of each other.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody is suggesting that Montreal is going to make the playoffs this year, but it just shows that in terms of that wild card race, I think it's going to be really tight, and that third place spot in those divisions. And looking at the Metro, though, there is a little bit of a gap there, especially because the Rangers and the Lightning have a couple fewer games played so far than some of the teams above them. So, the Rangers have 21 games played, and are out of the playoff picture right now, which is something I think that is a bigger surprise, right? That the fact that the Washington Capitals have that third playoff spot in the Metro right now.
Yeah, and they just keep finding ways to win even without Alexander Ovechkin, a plus 30 goal differential for the Capitals, and 8-2-0 on the road. They are playing incredibly well away from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and the Boston Bruins, who, like, you would think the sky is falling, they fired their coach, things are awry, but they're still in a playoff position, again, because the Atlantic isn't as strong as I think maybe people thought it might be, and certainly not as strong as the Metro. So there's room for them in that playoff position right now.
Yeah, and yet here's Tampa Bay 1 point behind Boston with 3 games in hand. So the
Yep.
amazing thing right now in the East, if you go on a 3-game winning streak, you could go from 14th in the conference to like 9th in just at the snap of a finger.
Yeah, and the Flyers, for instance, got off to a rough start. They're not far out of the wild card position right now. Detroit is still hanging in there as well, and I think it's just been fascinating, and the fact that the Islanders and Penguins are near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. It's just remarkable how different things are.
Yeah, not exactly the way people expected it to go. And again, we are just a little bit past the quarter pole of the NHL season, and yet, the surprises are already making themselves known. And to me, again, the biggest surprise is how tight the standings are right now.
Yeah, and then out west, of course, like the Winnipeg Jets have been the story this year, right? And, I think people, if they were in a playoff position at this point, nobody would bat an eye. But the fact that they're like atop the league is a huge deal. And the fact that the Minnesota Wild are right behind them, I think, again, in a playoff position, fine. But as well as they have been doing, I think is a pretty good accomplishment and should bode well for them for the rest of the season. And then I would say in the Pacific, the Calgary Flames in second place in that division, I think is the big surprise at this point.
Yeah, they got off to a really hot start. They have been hot and cold this year,
Mhm.
really, and yet now they are in second place, and yet they're on a 2-game losing streak, and they have a -1 goal differential despite being 12-7-4.
Yeah. And I would say the LA Kings, like again, not a surprise they're in a playoff position, but I think they've kind of been uh like ignored in a lot of ways just because, there've been these big stories with the Jets and the Wild and the Central and Dallas having some, uneven play but still in a playoff position. Then you have the Colorado Avalanche who weren't getting it together early but are starting that surge, right? And then Vancouver's having problems. The Oilers are out of a playoff spot right now. So the Kings are just like, we're doing our thing here and we're in a solid playoff spot. So I
Yeah,
think good for them.
absolutely, and yet, Edmonton is only 3 games behind the Kings, and they have a
Yep.
game in hand. So it is really, really tight, and that makes for some very exciting matchups and exciting hockey. Don't overlook the Avalanche. They were in
No.
they were so uh, out of sync early in the season, and now 7 out of their last 10 they've won, and they seem to be finding themselves a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at current streaks heading into the Black Friday games for the US here, the only team that has a streak that's longer than 2 is the New York Rangers, and they've lost 4, right? Every other streak in the league is a 1 or a 2, whether it's won or lost or an overtime or whatever. So, there really is some anybody can beat anybody going on right now.
Yeah, and that makes the games that much more exciting and that much more intriguing to watch because you don't know what's going to happen once, any two teams in the NHL take the ice. And that is certainly different from the way things were years ago when you definitely had the haves and the have-nots where, you knew certain teams by American Thanksgiving their season was over.
Right. And, the Nashville Predators had some success recently, but then they just lost in overtime to the Flyers in extremely heartbreaking fashion. Flyers tied it up with 11 seconds left and then won it in overtime. They're a team that's been struggling that maybe, hasn't or wasn't predicted to. Andrew Burnett is probably on the hot seat a little
Yeah.
bit because they are even below the Blackhawks in standings, which was, I think everybody expected the Sharks and Blackhawks to be at the bottom, right?
Right. And all the different players that Nashville brought in, Barry Trotz, adding Steven Stamkos, bringing in all these name players. We knew it might take them a little time to gel, but I don't think anybody expected them to be struggling this badly this late into the season.
No, no. So I think there's a lot of exciting hockey to be played ahead. And I think that this year is the year that the standings could change more significantly from Thanksgiving to the end of the season than in past years.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing in a lot of ways. Well, we have got a lot more to get to on today's show. We have Erica Ayala joining us for our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight as that season gets underway. We also have a very full and very exciting weekend of hockey ahead to preview. All that and more still to come on today's Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature on Game Time remains the view from your seat. You go on the app and you get a panoramic view from your seat before you purchase the tickets, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
Here's the thing. We earn points on groceries, travel, and practically everything else we buy, but we should be also earning points on rent, one of our biggest monthly expenses. Built changed the game by letting renters earn high value points on rent and around their neighborhood. There's no cost to join Built, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even ones you haven't heard of. There's over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Built points toward. Points can also be redeemed toward future rent payments and unique experiences that only Built members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points by paying rent right now when you go to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNHL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNHL. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNHL to start earning points with your rent payments today.
The PWHL season is about to get underway, and great timing because we have Erica Ayala here with our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight. And Erica, let's start with the rosters. We are set and ready to go for the second season of the PWHL.
Yes, we are. We know that the puck will drop, as you mentioned, this week, tomorrow, actually, and the rosters have been submitted. Now we're starting to get them slowly. So we have the Ottawa roster and the New York Sirens roster, which we'll circle back to a little bit later, Rachel. But let's start with Ottawa since they were the first team. They get the gold star for placing their roster up first. But as they're looking to round out, this year and, maybe get a little bit higher and closer to a playoff spot, what stands out to you from this Ottawa team?
Because they missed the playoffs last year, obviously they wanted to, improve things. They did lose Daryl Watts off their roster this year, but gained Danielle Cernacki. And I think she is a really good addition to this roster. Plus, with some of their core returnees like Shan Darkangelo, Brianne Jenner, I do think that, Savannah Harmon on the blue line, who's my favorite defender in women's hockey. So they have a lot of really strong players here. It's just a matter of, can they put it together more consistently?
Yeah, for sure. I also like that they have some of the Czechia players. Rachel, I love Team Czechia. I think that they play a really great game at the international level. So to see Katarzyna Mrazova as well as Teresa Vanishova on that roster, Natalie Snodgrass also is kind of a really interesting pick there. But those are all also returners to this team. Interesting, though, because this Ottawa team, they couldn't find a place for Michaela Grant-Mentis, who just continues to thrive, with Montreal alongside one of the greatest to ever do it in Marie-Philippe Poulin. So we don't have that full Montreal roster. I know a lot of people wondering if and when we'll see the great Julian Dempsey. But we'll have to see as these rosters fill out. Now with the Sirens, there was a little bit of trying to figure out if they were going to be able to land their big fish, but they were able to do that, Rachel. And I think that this team is going to be interesting to see what kind of leadership comes, because they struggled as well. But I think that they're hoping that they can really settle things this year, and their number one draft pick is a huge part of that.
Right. Sarah Fillier and getting her signed was a big deal. It took a little while, but they finally got there. New York was the last place team from last year. They opened their season against the defending champs. So that is a real big challenge for them. They have a new coach in Greg Fargo. They have a new arena in the Prudential Center
Mhm.
in New Jersey. And so I think there was a lot of disconnect and lack of chemistry on this team last season. And
Yeah.
that is going to be the key, is can the new coach really get them to play as a unit?
Yeah, for sure. And just taking a look now the rosters are starting to pour in, of course, as we said that. But I love to see that Chloe Orard and Jade Downey Landry are back on this team. We mentioned Fillier, Elizabeth Giguere. I think even during the
Mhm.
PHF years is an interesting player, a lot of talent, but I think that sometimes the environment, Gil, almost has to be right. And those players always intrigue me because, again, you want to be able to unearth that talent, but you also want to be able to have people fit into a system.
Yeah, that's always sort of walking that delicate line. And some of those players, if you can maximize the talent into production, they can be really useful. But if you can't, it can be a real problem in the locker room, and things can drift apart.
Yeah, for sure. So looking to see what happens there. I mean, I love to see that Abby Levy and Corrine Schroeder both on this roster. I think that they showed that they're a great goalie tandem. They add Kaylee Osborne as well there. And then, of course, there is Zandy Hart, who was the captain last year, but was injured, Rachel. And I
Yep.
would imagine that, the Sirens are really hoping to have a healthy leadership core with Zandy Hart at the lead right there.
Yeah, and that should help with cohesiveness defensively on that team.
Yeah, for sure. We again, the rosters are literally coming in as we are recording here. But we also have the Boston roster. I think this is going to be an interesting team because they were able to get to the final, just couldn't get over the hump that is Minnesota. But I think that, a lot of people looking at Hillary Knight, we've alluded to it. There was a rivalry series stop in Hillary Knight's hometown. Are we thinking this could be the last run? Also, what do we need to see from Hillary Knight? Because, we were pretty critical of her early on.
Yeah, Boston, I think, even though they just squeaked into the playoffs, right, and then made
Yeah.
it to the final, but they had a lot of trouble scoring, especially early in their season. And they've been kind of that veteran team, right, built around Hillary Knight. And I think like this is the year that more of the younger players are going to have to be a big part of it. Hannah Bilka, I think, is going to be a huge part of that, and hopefully she can help drive play on this team.
Yeah, for sure. And another team I want to talk about is Toronto. Now, this Gill was a team that they took a little while to hop out of the gate, and then they really surged under, again, Natalie Spooner. We talked about her. She was not ready for camp. But when you have a team that was able to literally pick their opponent, but then they don't get out of the first round, I mean, that's kind of brutal. And I can tell you for sure, we spoke to a few of these players in the offseason, and there's definitely a chip on their shoulder.
There has to be. There has to be. When you pick your opponent, when you call out another team and say, we can beat you, and then you don't follow it up, that's got to leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth.
Yeah, for sure. So, Spooner is going to be someone who they'll hope to get back here. But you mentioned that there were some players, Rachel, for the Ottawa team that will not be returning. But Daryl Watts actually is on this Toronto team.
Yep.
We also know that Emma Woods from New York is on this team. So it's a little bit of a reuniting of some of those players from the Toronto Six who ended up winning what was the last ever Isabel Cup.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that Toronto has a mission this year because of that chip on their shoulders. And I think they've put together a roster that should, in theory, be better than the one they had last year. It's just a matter of, can they put it together?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also going to be interesting to see what we get in net. Kristen Campbell, Soupy as she's known, and CJ Jackson return
You
to the
always love CJ.
always love CJ. But again, they have two players starting on LTIR that are on their roster. Spooner, as we mentioned, and then also Megan Carter. Both of those injuries were listed before. So again, the roster's just coming in. So we're not going to go through all of them. Those are the ones that we were able to see for sure. But check out the PWHL website because all of the rosters are in now or will be posted soon. But that leads us to talk about something else here. And it's like, how can you watch these games? And the answer, Rachel, is if you're in Canada, you can't watch on YouTube.
No, and it's not even like officially out there as of this recording. It's just sort of been anecdotally confirmed by some media outlets and reporters. And
Right.
the fact that they have not announced a specific US broadcast
Yeah.
plan either. They have officially announced the Boston Fleet one. Maybe they're announcing the New York Sirens one as we're recording this with all the rosters. But, Nesson will carry the Fleet games, MSG will carry the Sirens games. Our understanding is that all the other games, US games, will be on YouTube in the US, but available nowhere else in the world on YouTube. We know there's a foreign broadcast in Czechia, already arranged, and I'm not sure about the rest of Europe, but it's been a little haphazard, I gotta say, in terms of where can you watch, which is so important, right? Even if you want to like set DVRs to record, like I just want to record all the Sirens games. And it's even small things like if you want to search for the PWHL in like Fubo, you have to search for Professional Women's Hockey League all written out. You can't search for PWHL. So
that's a lot of letters.
Like the little things, right, that we just don't know. And I think it's important for the league to get out in a cohesive format.
I would agree with that. Unfortunately, Rachel, what you're talking about is not foreign to sports and certainly not foreign to hockey. I'm not saying it's right, but it's just one of those headaches that I think, Gil, seems a little bit harder for especially teams to figure out. I host Locked On Kraken, and Seattle was with the Mariners broadcast Root Sports and then switched to an in-house. And now that has made it more difficult for me as someone who's not in Seattle to watch the games. So I listen a lot on radio, which I'm glad we have, but that's not even an option right now for women's hockey fans. Radio, that is.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to grow the game, you have to make it as easy as possible for people who are interested in finding those games to be able to watch them.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say that these broadcasts, the quality is the best I've ever seen. And I'm going to be honest, at least for me, Rachel, I'm including what we sometimes see at the international level, certainly for the rivalry series and even at the Olympics, which is wild. We want all of the angles. Give us all of the angles. We want it all. But finally, Rachel and I are kind of twinning it up here with our New York Riveters.
Unplanned, I swear.
Unplanned. But we got some throwback gear, and that is because we are tossing up stick taps to the captain, not the original captain of the Riveters. That goes to Ashley Stretch Johnston, but the captain of the New York Riveters, who then came over to PWHL New York, now the Sirens. Madison Packer announced her retirement. It seems like, Rachel, and we've talked about this, it seemed like it was going to be an uphill climb for Madison Packer to be able to make an impact on this Sirens roster. And unfortunately, instead of maybe trying to look for another team, Madison Packer has decided to hang up the skates. We know she's got 2 young children and lives in the tri-state area. So to go elsewhere would have been difficult. And she's been outspoken even on right here on Locked On NHL about that was important to be able to stay close to home. So I mean, Madison Packer, what can you say? Definitely a personality, take that as you will, but also someone who has definitely impacted women's hockey and has helped grow the game.
Sure. She's been an incredible ambassador for women's pro hockey, always willing to put herself out there and go the extra mile in the community and in the media to help this game. Played in the NWHL/PHF for 8 full seasons with the New York team, and I think developed a reputation as like a physical player, but with some skill too. And I think like that's really for me her legacy, coming from Wisconsin into this new pro league and just making such a huge impact. And I think like when you think about like the earlier years of women's pro hockey and people saying, "Oh, but you can't check." Madison Packer like made her she found a way. let's be
Define
clear.
check, right? I mean,
Yeah. Something that's not allowed doesn't mean that it's not present.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, we are wishing Packer the best. She and her family, who she thanked, will take what we can get. But Gil and Rachel, thank you so much. And coming soon, I should say. I know my Locked On listeners already know this, but we're going to continue this format, but on a Saturday where we will extend and expand our coverage of women's hockey. So make sure you stay tuned for that. We're going to give Rachel and Gil back a whole segment on Fridays. And there's just a lot of new formatting coming on Locked On NHL, which will include a dedicated weekly show to women's hockey that we hope will continue to grow from there. But Rachel and Gil, thank you so much for sharing this space with women's hockey fans. I think we have a little bit of an overlap to go, but we can't wait for an expanded show covering women's hockey.
Yeah, congratulations on that, and looking forward to it. And it's going to be great. A little more coverage and every week, and that's much needed in this landscape.
Indeed. Well, always a pleasure to catch up with y'all. And, we're coming up on puck drop, so there'll be lots of action to talk about, and also maybe some meetups from this crew here. So we'll see if we can make it happen.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And hockey fans, use your knowledge of the game of hockey and your favorite team to place exciting bets on FanDuel as well. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So busy schedule ahead, starting with a lot of action today on Black Friday, as the NHL schedule a little unusual, and so many really interesting games. Let's start with the Florida Panthers visiting the Carolina Hurricanes. This is a really great weekend matchup.
Yeah, this is a home and home series. So they are in Carolina on Friday, in Florida on Saturday. Panthers have been off a little bit recently, 4-6 in their last 10. But these two teams are similar in terms of goals for versus goals against. But the Canes are getting a ton more scoring chances. And so I think Florida just needs to shoot a little bit more and shoot better.
Yeah, that's been a little bit of an issue, and they've cooled off after a pretty hot start. So interesting to see how they handle it. This is sort of a measuring stick, I think, for both of these teams right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see if they, split the series or if one team dominates as, the weekend progresses.
How about the Vancouver Canucks visiting the Buffalo Sabres? And Buffalo's hanging around in the Eastern Conference, even if they're a little unable to play consistently well.
Yeah, and I think that, the Sabres are 7-3 in their last 10. Like you said, the Canucks have been pretty uneven. So there's a lot of opportunity here for Buffalo in this one.
No doubt. And that's a good one. And how about the Devils in Detroit to take on the Red Wings? Another one of those teams bunched up in the middle of that wild card hunt in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, the Devils, though, have been playing just so well that I really think, like, unless something weird happens, the Devils are gonna win this game.
LA and Anaheim at 3:30 Eastern time, the great rivalry out in Southern California.
Yeah, and the Ducks are, I think, improved this year. Certainly not in the basement this year thus far. And talked about the Kings in the first segment that they're just quietly going about their business. They always love traveling to Anaheim because their fans come with them every single time, and it's a tough building on those particular game days. But yeah, I think it should be a really good matchup.
8:30 Eastern time, a great Western Conference battle, Winnipeg and the Vegas Golden Knights.
This is the battle of the day, in my opinion. I think that, Vegas is very much itching to dethrone Winnipeg in the league. And I think that it's going to be a fun game for sure.
Colorado Avalanche visiting the Dallas Stars in another division rivalry with two teams fighting for playoff positioning.
Yeah, they are right next to each other in the standings right now with the same number of points and the same number of wins as well. And I think, Colorado is starting to put things together, and they got some injured players back. They're raring to go. And this is going to be another very good game today.
Saturday, as usual, a pretty full schedule. And I'm going to start with this game. The Montreal Canadiens visiting Madison Square Garden to take on the Rangers. Can the Rangers get back on track?
Well, I think it'll be interesting because they're also playing on Friday at 1 p.m. So second half of a back-to-back for the Rangers with afternoon games. Afternoon games tend to throw players off in general. So to have two of them in a row is going to be tough. And, like I said, they're on a losing streak right now, leading into the Friday game. So I think, this is going to be a telling game in particular because playing the Flyers followed by the Canadiens, they can't win at least one of those two games. I think that those trade rumors are going to start to get louder.
Yeah, no doubt about that. The Washington Capitals visiting New Jersey to take on the Devils. That's a great Metro Division rivalry right there.
Yeah, and Caps fans have been known to take the train up to these sorts of games, especially on a weekend like this, and make a day of it in the New York area. So I expect there to be kind of a mixed crowd here at the Prudential Center. But, I think this is the way for the Devils to say, no, like it really is just us and Carolina. Everybody else is in a separate category.
The Toronto Maple Leafs visiting the Tampa Bay Lightning in an Atlantic Division battle.
Yeah, I think, this is always going to be a fun game in division. And this is, I believe, part of the Toronto trip down to Florida for a little bit. But I think that, there's a lot of Canadians that live in the Tampa area that will show up for this one. But yeah, Toronto's like not exactly together either. So I think this is a big game for them.
Yeah, still dealing with some injuries up in Toronto as
Mhm.
well. And how about the Edmonton Oilers and the Colorado Avalanche?
Yeah, I think that this game is, a very important one for the Avalanche in particular if they're going to try and keep these things going, right, and keep this momentum going through the weekend. But with so many teams playing on both Friday and Saturday, I think there's going to be a lot of like evenness in terms of teams playing tired.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Now, Sunday, there are 5 games on the schedule. One that stands out to me, the Canucks visiting the Red Wings.
Yeah, and I think this game, an afternoon game at 12:30, so even a little earlier. This is a game where I think how these teams do earlier in the weekend is going to have an impact here because like the Red Wings really need to get above 500 here, and the Canucks again have been inconsistent, and so this should be an interesting battle.
And to me, the best game of Sunday, the Winnipeg Jets heading down to Texas to take on the Dallas Stars.
Yeah, obviously everybody's gunning for the Jets right now, and the Stars are, of course, part of that. And with the Stars having a day off on Saturday, like that should give them some time to get it together to prepare for the Jets.
Yeah, should be a very, very interesting game, and we're looking forward to seeing that. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from our hosts, Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's going to do it for us. Remember that we are here every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the NHL. I'll be back Monday interviewing 3 of our local hosts with some of those big, important stories. So looking forward to that. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.